Okay, so you are ready to write your final proposal argument. So you might have a couple of questions, and so make sure that you go back to the final paper directions and read those really thoroughly and really carefully. You might be tired of seeing those directions, but they really lay out everything I'm looking for and all the expectations, ranging from what a good thesis statement looks like to how to address feasibility in your argument. So the first thing that I want to address is making absolutely sure that you have a practical argument and not just advice. This is a big stumbling block for some people as we try to wrap our minds around it. Anytime we've proposed solutions in the past to problems, our answer has probably been telling people what they should do. A practical argument, though, doesn't do that. A practical argument takes a very specific problem and addresses it with a community-based solution. So your question, if you haven't, or your job if you haven't already done this, is to think about what group is responsible or should be or can be responsible for addressing some small part of the solution. Remember that these don't have to be wide sweeping proposals. You don't have to completely fix everything about the problem you've identified. Your job is really just to address one part of it. So make absolutely sure, if you haven't to this point, that you have a specific audience, because having a clear specific audience that's a group takes you half of the way toward where you need to be for your solution. So think through, for your problem, what group or organization should be responsible, or do you think can be responsible for helping to fix it? I look at, for example, K through 12 education, that's kindergarten through 12th grade. Remembering that the curriculum is usually set at a local level but with some state requirements. You could look at a school board for a particular school, a specific school district, if you want to look at the Cuyahoga County School District, for example. Depending on your argument, maybe you want to look at higher ed. If you're looking at higher ed, which is college, maybe either think about writing to a specific college, an administrator at that college, the president or the provost are usually good ideas. A group of colleges. Do you want this to be something that community colleges address, all four-year institutions, just private colleges? They're all very different, so you want to be specific. The state government. You might find that for whatever it is you're trying to pass, a new law or regulation needs to be put into place. And while we're kind of on the border of a policy argument when we talk about changing laws, as long as you keep it to a state level, you should be okay. So think about, is this something that the governor's office should address, your state congressperson or senator, your representative on the legislative board? Maybe look up who that is. Are you looking at the Ohio Board of Regents? That's a state level organization that's in charge of higher education and curriculum. You could think about a more local group, your local YMCA, libraries, or SPCA, depending on your argument again. Is there something that they can do? So look into who that specific group is. If you want to write to businesses, you could write to the Chamber of Commerce, which is a group of businesses in most cities that address lots of policies and ideas about how to grow businesses and how to support businesses in the community. Or you could look up a specific business. Maybe, like the example we read about Heinen's, you could just target one specific business and say, you can be the pilot group. You can be the group that puts this forward. You can be the role model for other businesses. Or do you want to look at your local city council or a local department, like the police or fire department? Again, having that clear specific audience is going to help you avoid just giving advice to your audience. Okay? So this leads into the next idea. When you're writing, you are not writing to individuals or to people or to a broad group like students, parents, community members. Okay? Because that's really vague. Parents is a huge group. There are so many different kinds of parents and families that it doesn't even really make sense to address them as a single group. You want to avoid using you, okay? When you use you in your essays, a lot of times what you're actually doing is telling people what to do. You're sort of imagining that your audience is this wide group that has somehow come across your paper and is going to read it and change their behavior like it's a magazine article. But a research proposal is a little bit different. It's not like a magazine article. You can't expect that broad groups are going to pick up your paper and read it. I know it's a hard distinction sometimes to kind of wrap our minds around. So that's part of why I suggest that you don't use you. Here's the risk. If your audience doesn't agree with the statement that you're making, or doesn't think that the statement you're making applies to them, you can actually offend your audience, annoy your audience, or immediately start to make them think about the ways that your argument doesn't apply to them. So let's take a look at our example. Let's say, all the way back to that solution that I wrote the example for paper 3, I said, what if students are failing science classes, okay, at Lakeland? And let's say I want to put together some kind of solution that will help more students pass science classes. Imagine if you're reading this paper and you come across this phrase, you should waste less time so you can study more. Well, judging by the grades and feedback and papers I've received in this class, you're already all doing a really good job of studying plenty of time, right? You're putting lots of time into your classes, you're conscientious students, you have very busy lives, and you're balancing them really well. So if you're reading this and you read, you should waste less time, your brain might immediately start going, wait a minute, I don't have time to waste. I manage my time really well. And you see how that makes you kind of argumentative? Same for we. We should all waste less time so we can study more. That one's slightly less, might not get your hackles up quite as much because at least the writer is acknowledging that they're in that boat too. But again, if you feel like I don't waste time, I'm pretty good with my time, that doesn't resonate with you. Take that and compare it to the third one here. Some students waste time, which takes away from study time. Okay, all of a sudden, if I'm a good student, I don't take any offense to that statement. I don't disagree with it. I don't immediately want to argue that doesn't fit me. Does that make sense? That's the difference between you and some. The other thing is, if I'm writing to the president of Lakeland Community College, Morris Beveridge, and I'm writing, you should waste less time so you can study more, that doesn't even make sense because I'm not telling Morris Beveridge that he should study. That's students. And so the third one here, some students waste time, which takes away from study time, makes more sense to him, right? It makes your argument clearer. So again, that's one kind of thing that I usually check for just with the find button on Microsoft Word. I just do like a Control F, type in you, and I look and see to make sure that I haven't slipped it into my writing in any way that I didn't intend to. All right? Okay, so another point that you want to look at as you're revising this together is opposing arguments. I think a lot of people start to imagine that there's groups that don't agree about the problem, and that's true, or who think that their solution won't work. That can also be true. But don't forget that one opposing argument is actually other solutions. So if I'm saying that we need to make high school standards more rigorous in science classes so students do better in college, there might be people who absolutely think that that's not a bad idea, but who think another solution would actually work better. So somebody might say, well, that sounds good, but I have a much better solution. In fact, I think that there should be a developmental science course to get students ready for college-level science classes. See, we agree on a lot of stuff. We think there's a problem. We think it should be fixed. We disagree on how to do it. If that's the case, I need to acknowledge that some people think there's a better solution and then explain why mine's better, why it's more practical, more feasible, more effective. Okay? Here's another example. If I was going to say Lakeland should build a student center to give students a place to study, okay? Now, I might go through and address that some people think this is too expensive or that it isn't necessary, but I might also come across somebody who agrees, yeah, Lakeland students need a better place to study on campus, but might disagree about how to do it. They might think a better way is to enforce quiet areas in the study spaces that already exist, like upstairs at the library, upstairs in the study room with breakers in the A and B hallway, faculty, across from the faculty area, there's those study spaces, and in the new building. And enforcing quiet zones would also give students a place to study at much less cost. So if I want to stick with my student center idea, it's my job then to say, other people might argue that just enforcing quiet study zones would be effective. However, then I have to explain why my idea is better. All right? Okay. So now we have all of our materials together. You've finished your research, you have all of your papers, you've got your ideas in order. You have to figure out, how am I going to start this paper, okay? I think introductions can be tough because you kind of feel like you have to get everything out, but you only have a little bit of space to do it. So here's something that I want you to consider. Using some kind of news story that shows who is affected by the problem you want to address, okay? So if you can find some kind of recent story that in any way relates to your ideas, that has a person in it, that's ideal. Somewhere in the realm of 75% of professional writing that you're going to find out in the world starts with a narrative. So that's magazine writing, newspaper writing, that kind of stuff. Starts with some kind of story. It puts the person into your idea. Ethos and pathos are more important in the introduction than logos, all right? You have the whole rest of your paper to convince your audience that there's a problem and that your solution will work. But in our case, you gotta get them interested. You have to draw their attention, and you have to get them thinking about the human side of the story. So, and by human side, it could also be business side. If there's a huge profit to be made and that's in your audience is business, that's appealing to their values. So ethos and pathos. You want to build your credibility and you want to appeal to their values. You also want your introduction to end with a thesis statement. Now this thesis statement can be just a statement of the problem or a statement of the problem and solution. That's up to you. But two things to avoid. Previous thesis statements where you say, this research essay will examine, and then you kind of say what you're going to do. Avoid that. Also avoid lists. And there are examples of this on the assignment sheet. So you want to review the section on the assignment sheet that talks about thesis statements and how to put together a really effective college level analytical thesis statement. Okay, so now you've got your introduction, you've got your thesis statement, you have your problem section figured out, you know how to write a practical proposal and not advice, and you have addressed your opposing arguments. At least you have all of that in your mind and in various places on paper, right? So your next step is to really think about how to organize something like this. Now when it comes to organization, I have a couple of suggestions. The first, print papers 1, 2, and 3, and print your response to the opposing argument assignment from last week. Look at each of the papers and maybe print them with feedback or without. That's your call, whichever one you want, but make sure you've read the feedback thoroughly. Reread those papers. See what you had to say. Is your thinking still in the same place or has it moved? Okay. I also recommend printing, or at least, at the very least, gathering all of your sources into one place, one folder. Highlight with a marker or with a highlighter or a pen, however you want to do it, sections of each of the papers that you absolutely think need to be in the final paper. It's your best argument, it's your best writing, it's your best research. The stuff that you know is going to be effective in that final paper. Look back at your sources. Highlight any sections that you remember are really important to making your point. So you may or may not have paraphrased, summarized, or quoted from them in previous papers, but you know they're important. All right, so that's step 1, print all your stuff, reread it, decide what's important. Step 2, look back and see what you have in your sources. All right. Step 3 for me is to think about what you already have, and that's usually paper 1, 2, the problem paper, right next to paper 3, the solution paper, because in many ways that's kind of the outline of what you're going to have. And then I recommend you actually outline on a sheet of paper what you have so far. Okay. Let me show you one way to do that. All right. So one way to do this is to split your paper into 2 columns and to number the paragraphs of whatever it is you want to outline. So I might take paper 2, number my paragraphs, paper 3, number my paragraphs. In this first column, for paragraph 1, you're going to write a really brief 1-sentence summary of the paragraph. Same for paragraph 2, 3, 4. Go all the way through. You can either do a separate one for each paper or one long one that sort of combines your papers. All right? And that's the easy part. That's the part where you really just see what have I said. Okay, that's why it's called says. In the second column, I want you to think really carefully about what the purpose of that paragraph is. That is, what does the paragraph do? Does it introduce a new idea? Does it support an existing idea? Does it explain the causes of a problem? Does it explain the problem itself? Does it explain the effects of the problem, the negative effects? Does it explain the solution? Does it show the feasibility of the solution? Does it address opposing arguments? What is the purpose of that paragraph? What does the paragraph do? Okay. This is going to help you see if you have repetition, that you need to eliminate things. It's also going to show you in that right-hand column, am I missing something? If there's nothing in that right-hand column when you're finished that says feasibility, that says opposing arguments, that says the negative effects of the problem, well then you know, based on the final assignment sheet, that you need to go back and add some of that in. Okay? Let me show you what this looks like. This is for a completed paper about university hospitals' drink selections. Okay? So on the left-hand side is basically just an outline of what the paper has right now. On the right-hand side is the does. So the first paragraph introduced the topic. The second paragraph is background information, what the hospital is doing currently. The third paragraph specifically addresses audience values because it talks about the university health like mission statement. Okay. Then the problem is introduced. Again, the current solution is reinforced. Part of the problem is introduced, part of the solution is introduced. Right now, this looks a little jumpy, so I might recommend, if this is what the author has, to rearrange some of it so that it comes through more clearly. But again, refutation, solutions, evidence, support, that's what goes in that right-hand column to give you a sense of, do I have all of the parts? Then you can easily pick these up and rearrange them. Okay? So I would, again, make the says does outline, and then on another sheet of paper, write out what your outline for your final paper should look like in your mind, and then start plugging in what you have and start identifying gaps. That is, places you don't have very much yet to put there, and that's the says does outline. Again, so you've got your papers, you start putting everything in together. Now it does require, this final paper does require 50% new writing, so make sure that once you've done all of this, you still have plenty of new stuff that you can write. So you can heavily revise stuff you already have, you can reorganize it, and then you also want to make sure that you have some new writing. I think when you revisit your other papers, you're going to see that some of it you'd like to rewrite now anyway because your thinking has changed. All right? Again, I know this is a big project, and for some of you this might be the longest paper you've written. For others, you've done this a few times and it's more familiar. So wherever you're at in the process, just know that by making sure you have a practical argument, choosing a really specific audience, addressing all the opposing arguments, including other solutions, and trying to keep yourself organized, you're going to put together a really successful proposal argument. Good luck.